U.S. military reached out to the Russians and said, we're getting hit. Are these Russians? And the Russians said, no, they're not. And so the U.S. and the Syrian Democratic Forces responded. The number killed is somewhere between 1 and 300. We've never gotten a really good sense of that on the record, certainly. But, you know, we know that then the Russians called the U.S. and said, can we come and pick up some of our guys? They were Russian mercenaries.
It's an amazing story, but it's overshadowed by this meeting. And would you expand on the reaction in the Pentagon, especially between President Moon meeting with Kim Jong-un?
I think it's cautious optimism still. So what we still don't have is a lot of definition. We don't. So look at, for starters, the idea that the war on the Korean Peninsula will now be over. Well, that's not just something that you can say, okay, war is over and that's that. There has to actually be a negotiation that would involve the United States, North Korea, South Korea. China has to have a piece of this as well, but there actually has to be a treaty that's signed. It can't just be, this is a good first step towards that. The idea of denuclearizing the peninsula, which we've been hearing about now for a week or so, we need specifics. What does that mean? Does that just mean that Kim Jong-un, you know, to the U.S., that means he has no more nukes? To Kim Jong-un, does that mean he doesn't produce anymore? Does it mean he doesn't test anymore?
A lot of details.
So, there's cautious optimism. I mean, look, the pictures that we saw out of Panmunjom are unbelievable.
They are. Karen Tumulty, you've been covering a lot of things for a lot of years for the Washington Post, but this is really extraordinary. How did it rate in your assessment of the week?
You know, this is one of these things that we're going to have to figure out how it rates in our assessment of the year, because the one thing that we have seen with the North Koreans over the last few decades are, you know, things that look like progress, and certainly this is better than not happening, but whether there's follow through, whether there's consistency. And again, what the definition of denuclearization is it just to discontinue testing? And if it's just to discontinue testing because they don't think they need the test, again, we don't know until we have sort of a further timeline.
And you were at work at a book on Reagan era, on Nancy Reagan. Reagan said trust but verify. With the North Koreans, you say verify, 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 and then maybe a little bit of trust.
Right,
it's just that almost they cheated on the 94 deal before the ink was dry on the signature.
Exactly. So, and what we know is that Kim Jong-un is going to be moving in ways that he thinks are in Kim Jong-un's interest. Yeah. And so the hardest thing, I think, is sort of getting inside his head right now and figuring out what he thinks is best for him.
Tim, Alberta, how do you rate the stories of the week, and has anything come close to this meeting in
No, I don't think it does. I mean, for the reasons that Karen and Courtney just laid out, I think it's pretty extraordinary. And really the moment that keeps sticking in my mind that I had to watch and rewatch about 10 times was when the North Korean leader asks the South Korean leader to step back over the line of demarcation into North Korean territory, which to me, and I'm no geopolitical foreign policy expert, but it just struck me at sort of the Western savviness on display by Kim Jong-un. This is somebody who we've read about his interest in American sports, American pop culture, a consumer of Hollywood. So this is somebody who I think in that moment, and probably throughout this entire process as he has started to maybe not warm up to the Trump administration, but signal some openness, I think has probably demonstrated a little bit of a different side than many of us on the outside, and probably many of his counterparts in South Korea necessarily expected. So I do think, even in the context of the president's extraordinary phone-in interview with Fox and Friends, which made news on a number of different fronts, and a number of other significant developments in D.C. this week, that none of that really can hold a light up next to this potential huge breakthrough on the Korean Peninsula.
It'll be the buzz tonight as Washington's journalists gather at the annual White House Correspondents' Association dinner, and the president won't be there. He'll be having a rally. I'm going to start with you, Tim, because it's about the press. We're going to reflect on the press for a little bit right now. It's an article of faith in the conservative world that President Obama got a free ride from the media, and it's an article of faith, too, that President Trump is getting hit harder than normal presidents would be hit. Comment on that, would you? And especially in light of, for example, President Obama getting a Nobel Prize basically on hope, and Lindsey Graham talking about President Trump getting one if indeed the change comes in North Korea. Do you think it's being reported fairly?
Well, that's a loaded, multi-part question, Hugh. Let me just try my best. I think certainly there has decades and decades of resentment towards the media building on the right. In fact, Politico magazine, if I can do a bit of shameless self-promotion, its new issue is the media issue, out in time for this weekend's festivities. And I have a story in which I talk about how, going all the way back to Eisenhower and Nixon even, there has been this attitude of sort of hostility and distrust towards the media, which in recent years has morphed into something a little more, some would say sinister and a little more than just antagonism. And I think what you've seen in the Trump era, certainly, is the media looking into the Trump administration with a degree of aggressiveness and scrutiny that conservatives feel like was totally absent during the 8 years of the Obama administration. The merits of that aside, I do think that there is an enormous potential, as I said actually on MSNBC earlier this week on Hallie Jackson's show, for the Trump administration to have a significant, not just a significant foreign policy accomplishment, but a defining administration accomplishment if, in fact, there is a real breakthrough with North Korea and if, in fact, there is some movement towards denuclearization. I don't think that that's something that, for all of the tweeting and all of the bizarre behavior and all of the other mini scandals in the administration, I don't think that that is something that could ever be taken away from Trump if, in fact, that is something that's realized.
Well said. Let's do a quick round of our own awards. The White House Correspondents Association is honoring, among others, Jake Tapper, who's coming up, Maggie Haberman. And so I asked you guys to come up with the name of someone who had a really great year in journalism, not named Maggie Haberman. My suggestion is Rachel Maddow, simply because her numbers, her audience continues to grow. And I love wonkishness, even though I don't often agree, if ever, with Rachel. There's an appetite for wonkish, serious journalism. I'm glad to see that. Courtney, who do you think is the journalist who's really shined?
Yeah, I absolutely concur on Rachel, and I love her wonkishness. And yes, even if you're coming from a different position than her, the fact that she has so much detail, I learn so much from her show every time. But I would actually say Katie Turner. She came on. People didn't know who she was when she started covering the Trump campaign in the very beginnings of it. And now she has her own show. She's doing tremendous reporting on there. She's a well-respected anchor. And it all started because they assigned her to go and cover this guy called Donald Trump when he decided to announce his candidacy.
It's all started because she's tough. I mean, she's really tough.
She's terrific. And I've worked on some stories with her, and I can tell you, every time I start to get a little bit wavering, or I still get a little nervous, she just barrels right through. She's
Karen, who's your nominee?
I put Katie down too, because it's just when I see her on my TV, I take it off mute because I know this interview is going to be really excellent. But I'm going to be like the Pulitzers, which kept splitting the awards. And I also think we are seeing an absolute golden age in investigative reporting. Yes. And these are ensemble casts at the major newspapers that are their game is, they're operating at a higher level than we have seen in a very long time, maybe all the way going back to Watergate.
Well, you have a Pulitzer over at the Post for this year, and it's a very well-deserved one.
Well, actually, two.
Two, that's right. Yes. I don't want to shortchange or the tyrant Ginsburg will come for me. How about you, Tim Alberta? Who's your person?
I've got to split the award also. So these guys are both friends of mine, but Josh Dawsey at the Washington Post is just an absolute force of nature, a guy who had not worked in D.C. prior to Trump taking office, was covering City Hall in New York, and came down here and has just been an absolute beast on the White House beat, first at Politico and now at the Washington Post, just breaking news at least once a week, it seems like. And then Jonathan Swan at Axios, who has really been kind of the franchise player for the startup over there. Those are two guys who, I used to be a sort of a breaking news guy myself, and now have the luxury of being a magazine writer, and I get teased by the breaking news guys. But those are two guys that, if you like breaking news and respect how hard it is to break news, that you just sort of stand in awe of both Josh and Jonathan.
Very well said. I think Swan was just like beamed here from an alien planet. He just showed up when scooping everyone. Thank you, Courtney and Karen. Thank you very much, Tim Alberta. I'll be right back with another award winner tonight, Jake Tapper. He'll be honored at the White House Correspondent Dinner along with some of his other colleagues. Stay tuned.
This is the ocean. Oh, let's swim